Hello again. It's time for Reading with Nana or Storytime with Nana, whichever you want to call it. Remember, we were reading in our book, The Missing Kitten. That's the first story. Well, we're on the last chapter, and we get to find out if they find Boots or if they get their happy ending. And here's our chapter. It's called The Big Search, and there's Boots. Shall we get started? There was sunlight coming in from somewhere else, Boots noticed, as the shed grew slowly lighter that morning. It wasn't just the space around the door where there was light. Maybe there was some sort of hole or another window that might be open so he could climb through it. It was up at the top, near the ceiling, he saw. Very high up, much higher than Suzanne's window. But then there were a lot more things to climb on in here. Piles of chairs, some benches, and more of those mats. He'd just have to find a way to reach it. Boots was sure that Suzanne was looking for him. Well, almost sure anyway. But the shed was all the way across the field from the school, he'd realized, as he lay curled up on the mats. What if Suzanne didn't know about it? He couldn't wait for someone to let him out. He would have to do it himself. He stretched out his paws, which felt a little better this morning, though they still ached from all that scratching. Then he padded across the pile of mats and made a wobbly jump onto an old wooden bench. That was the first step. "Where do we start?" Izzy asked. And they hurried across the playground. "Well, I don't know. Maybe we should find Jackson and tell him that those girls saw Boots," Suzanne suggested, but she couldn't see her brother anywhere, and she wanted to start searching. "My dad called yesterday, remember? And he spoke to Mrs. Hart in the office, and she asked in the staff room. No one had seen Boots. So he wasn't just hanging around school looking for us." Izzy frowned. "I know. I keep going on about him being shut in someplace, but..." "No, I think you're right. It's the only thing that makes sense," Suzanne said. But where?" Izzy shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe the classroom closets? Do you think if we asked Mrs. Hart, she could go and look?" "Oh, no. There's the bell." Suzanne looked anxiously around as everyone began to collect his or her stuff and head into school. "I can't go into school now. I can't. Boots is here somewhere. I know he is." Izzy patted her shoulder. "It's okay. Look, we'll tell Mrs. Mason that Boots might be here. We have to go in, Suzanne. Otherwise, we'll get in trouble." Well, yeah, she's right. Suzanne almost didn't care, but she supposed Izzy was right. Maybe they could ask the principal what to do. She'd said her dog used to follow her to school. She'd understand. But Miss Wilson was talking to one of the other teachers, and she just waved the girls past when Suzanne tried to hover in the doorway to talk to her. Mrs. Mason was late coming into her class, and when she finally arrived, she had her arms full of colored shirts for PE, and she didn't look like she wanted to hear about kittens, even though Izzy tried her best. "Oh, dear. Well, I'm sure you can take a look at recess," she said distractedly when the girls tried to explain. "Sit down, please, you two." "Sit down?" Suzanne opened her mouth to argue, but Mrs. Mason wasn't even looking at her anymore. "Once I take in attendance, everyone, I've got some exciting news. We're going to start practicing for Sports Day. We've scheduled a couple of extra PE sessions, and the first one is this morning. So let's just mark everyone here." She moved names around on the whiteboard. "Where's Keisha? Is she still sick? Okay." "I don't want to do PE," Suzanne whispered frantically. "I have to go and look for Boots." "PE," Izzy nudged her. "I just thought of something. Shut up in the shed, Suzanne. We said he might be." "What are you talking about?" Suzanne was fighting back tears. "There's a little shed at the end of the field where Mr. Larkin, the custodian, keeps stuff that doesn't get used very often. He was definitely carrying chairs in and out yesterday. I heard him complaining about how wet he'd gotten." "So the shed was open?" Suzanne breathed, her eyes widening. "It must have been. Now go and get changed, please, everyone. Then we'll go to the gym, and it's a little too wet for out on the field." "I'm not getting changed," Suzanne said, glancing at Izzy as though she thought her friend might argue. "I'm going to find Boots." "Uh-huh, and I'm coming with you," Izzy said. "Come on." They hurried out of the classroom ahead of everyone else, and Izzy grabbed Suzanne's hand. "It's this way. There's a side door. Come on." She pulled Suzanne down the hallway and pushed open a door that Suzanne hadn't even known about. "This is a quick way out to the field." "Hey, Izzy," someone called. "We're in the gym, not the field, and you aren't changed." But Izzy and Suzanne were already running across the damp grass. Oh boy. Boots wobbled on an old chair. He was almost there. He could see the narrow wooden windowsill and the dirty pane of glass. The wind was shaking it as though it were loose. If he could only get to it, maybe he could push his way out somehow. He balanced himself again, teetering on the edge of the old chair. He'd scrambled his way up the whole pile, and it had taken so long. If he misjudged his jump to the window, he wasn't sure he'd have the strength to climb up again. He was so hungry and tired, and his paws hurt. Poor little guy. His whiskers flicked and shook as he tried to figure out how he could make the jump. It was much further than he'd ever jumped before. And the strip of wood along the window was very small. But if it meant he could get out, then he would go back home and wait there for Suzanne. He would see if he could get back in through the cat flap. He tensed his muscles to spring and crouched there, trembling a little, trying to summon the courage to leap. Then his ears twitched. He could hear someone, people talking. There he is, trying to look out the window. "Boots, are you in there? Is the door locked, Izzy?" That was Suzanne. Boots let out a shrill, desperate meow and forgot to worry about how narrow the ledge was. He just went for it, scrambling madly with his paws as he almost made it, and then heaving himself up onto the windowsill. Then he batted his paws against the glass, meowing frantically. "I can hear him. He's in there, Izzy." "You were right. It's locked. I'll go get Mr. Larkin." Boots heard feet thudding away and cried out in panic. They hadn't heard him. They were leaving. "It's okay, Boots. Where are you?" There were noises outside, and Boots banged his nose against the grubby window, trying to see what was happening. Suzanne pulled herself up onto a tiny ledge on the outside of the window. "I can see you. It's really you. Boots. Oh, I've been so worried. I can't believe you climbed out of a window." She giggled with relief and sniffed. "And now you're trying to climb out of this one. Aren't you silly, Kitten?" Boots meowed and scraped, but the window wouldn't open. How was he going to get to Suzanne? "Oh, Mr. Larkin, the keys." Suzanne's face disappeared from the window, and Boots wriggled himself around as the door rattled and shook, and then it opened. With a joyful yowl, he bounded back to the wobbly chair and took a flying leap to the mats. Then Suzanne was there hugging him. Boots purred and rubbed his face against hers and purred louder. "Izzy, Suzanne, what are you doing out here?" Oh no, has he been shut up in here?" Mrs. Mason peered worriedly into the dusty shed. "All right," Suzanne told her, shivering. "Can I call my dad?" "Mrs. Mason, please, can I take him home?" Mrs. Mason nodded. "Yes, she'd better take him up to the office again. I hope he doesn't keep doing this, Suzanne." Suzanne petted Boots, who was pressed against her sweater like he never meant to let go. "Me too." "Well, he got soaking wet and trapped in the shed, so maybe he'll stay home now," Izzy suggested. Suzanne nodded. "He looks like he wants to go home," she agreed, feeling the sharp little points of Boots's claws hooked into her sweater. "I promise I will never let you get lost again," she whispered to him, feeling his whiskers brush across her cheek. "I'll take care of you forever." "Well, I'm really glad my mom said I could come back with you," Izzy sighed happily and blew on her hot chocolate. Suzanne nodded, petting Boots, who was curled up on her lap with his claws hooked determinedly into her school skirt. He wasn't letting her go. We might never have figured out where he was if it hadn't been for you. He could have been stuck in there for a really long time, until Mr. Larkin had to put the chairs away again. Boots purred as Suzanne gently rubbed behind his ears. He was finally starting to feel warm again. Suzanne's dad had lit a fire in the living room, and the girls were huddled in front of it. It was raining again, so it had been a wet walk home. They had splashed through the puddles as fast as they could, anxious to see Boots again and check that he was okay. "Do you want any more hot chocolate, girls?" Dad asked. "Jackson's getting another cup." Suzanne shook her head. "No, thanks." Izzy smiled at him. "No, thanks. That's okay. Thanks." It was delicious. It's too bad that cats can't have hot drinks, though. Boots must have been frozen after spending the night in the shed. "I've had him on my lap ever since I picked him up," Dad told him. except for when he was wolfing down a huge dinner and breakfast in one. He definitely wanted company, and since he couldn't have you, Suzanne, I was the next best thing. Well, I hope he's not going to follow us again tomorrow, Suzanne said, looking down at him anxiously. He didn't look very adventurous at the moment. Dad shook his head. No, I'm sure he'll remember being trapped. He won't want that to happen again. But I promise I will make sure every window is closed. I'll even let him play with the computer, Suzanne. He grinned. I'll find him one of those homework websites, then he won't need to go to school. Boots stretched out his paws and stared up at everyone in surprise as they laughed, and then once again he curled himself into the front of Suzanne's sweater. It was cozy and warm inside, and dry. He hadn't realized how damp and miserable it could be following people. For the moment, he was going to stay right here. And there you go. That's the end of the story. All right. Next time we'll start another book. Good night.